Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing of Pacific War, GMT Games' recent re-release and reworking of its massive game covering tactical, operational, and strategic level combat in the Pacific Theater in World War II. Let's jump in, open up the box, take a look at the components, and offer some impressions. Let's get started. Now, if you need any indication as to how complex and massive this game is, it comes with 3 rulebooks, and check out the thickness of these. I mean, this is incredible. Look at this. There's 1,500 pages of rules. Now, I'm only kidding. This is not 1,500 pages of rules. But I did want to start out by recommending some reading, because chances are if you're going to spend some time digging into a game like this, you may want to spend some time checking out the history of the engagement. I've read the first one of these, Ian Toll's Pacific Crucible. It's a trilogy by Ian Toll covering the entire Pacific campaign. I'm about 20% of the way through the second one here. They are fantastic, masterfully researched. He's a fantastic storyteller. Highly recommend adding these, if you like to read, highly recommend adding these books to the experience of Pacific War, because I think it will only enrich your experience and enjoyment of the game. And so with that little pun aside, let's jump in now and take a look at our game. Here we go. First of all, this is massive. It's about 4 inches thick. It weighs about 10 pounds. And I wasn't kidding about the 3 rule books. Covers the whole campaign from 1941 to 1945. Let's start out by taking a look at the back side here at some of the general features of the game. And I do have a couple of observations on this as well. So the general feature mentions 1 to 2 players. And the solitaire suitability on the back of the box here is a 2. Now, interestingly enough, compare this to what the rating on the GMT website is, where the solitaire rating is a 5. And I have to say, one of my purchasing factors is the solitaire playability of this game. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that as we consider this, because it's rated as a 5 on the GMT website, but then when you get it, it's only a 2. So slightly, I'm not sure if disappointed is the right word, but kind of wondering how the solitaire experience might be for this game. On the GMT website, the designer Mark Herman mentions that the only mechanic you really can't handle in a solitaire situation, and there are rules written into the game for it. There's a section of rules talking about this, is the bidding system that's used in the game. And that's the only one that really isn't there. There isn't an AI bot as well. However, one of the big components of the Pacific campaign is the informational nature of it. People were operating under systems of imperfect information search. Nobody had an idea exactly what was going on, and you're making decisions based on only a partial understanding of the operational situation or tactical level situation that was out there. So I'm really curious to see how the game handles that aspect as a solitaire experience. So with that being said, I was a little surprised that the rating here in the box is considerably lower than the website as of when I'm making this video, which is the early part of March 2022. Now, the complexity here is a 9. On the website, it's rated an 8, not much of a discrepancy. Clearly, this feels like a 9. As we'll look at some of the components and some of the rules, 3 rule books, there are mechanics for literally everything at the tactical, operational, and strategic level of the Pacific War, and they are very nuanced and detailed and historically accurate. So this definitely feels like a 9. Now, the rating here is 3 to 100 hours. I think it's actually, if we look at some of the components in the game and some of the scenarios in the game, we'll find that this range actually extends well beyond both of these parameters. There's a series of kind of learning engagements that can be as quick as 15 minutes or so, and there's a good number of those. And then the actual strategic level campaign, the full Pacific War campaign, is 100 hours. I think would be a very conservative estimate for that. One of the ranges in the scenario itself lists as 200 hours. So this, I think 100 hours would be playing that scenario at a very brisk pace, perhaps unattainable at least until you've played it a few times, which again, I'm not sure who's going to play a strategic level game of 100 hours multiple times, but I think that this again could probably extend to 200 or 300 hours if you're talking about that full war strategic level game. Units are kind of air groups. We see divisions, battalions, up to corps. The individual ships are modeled in the game, so we've got, again, just an incredible range of scope and scale in this package. And with that being said, let's open it up now and take a look at some of the components inside. Now, normally when I do this, I kind of do the opening up of the box on screen, but because this is so massive and tall, I'm actually going to slide this off to the side and pull things in kind of piecemeal. And I've kind of arranged these in a particular order so that we can kind of look at them within the scope and scale, within a kind of a sequence in which I'd like to show them. So here we have now, the first thing we're looking at is the scenario booklet. I wanted to start with the scenario booklet because I think this highlights an important feature of the game. There's really 4 levels to this game, almost 4 games within a game. And if we look on the front here, we see, and there are basically, there's 8 engagement scenarios. And these are kind of designed as almost single player experiences, very short, 15 minutes to under an hour, that are going to teach you a lot of the mechanics after you've learned some of the core rules of the game. So these are short, single player, often really fast, designed to kind of help you learn the system and get used to playing with the different mechanics and elements of the game. Then we have 12 battle scenarios. These are engagements that take about 1 to 2, 3 hours or so. Things like the Battle of Coral Sea, Midway. And these are listed as battle scenarios where they involve more of the rules, but yet still aren't getting to the level of the higher level campaigns and the higher level strategic scenarios. We then have 9 campaign scenarios, things like the Philippines, the Guadalcanal campaign. And from my understanding from people that have played the previous version of the game, this is where the game really shines. This is where the magnificence of the system and all of the all the mechanics and the elements of the game really come together. And these can last anywhere from, I think the shorter one was 3 hours and the longer one's 25. But I think, again, these might be substantially longer than that as you actually get into play until you kind of get very familiar with the rules, which is going to take quite a bit of time. But this is designed, I think, this is where the game system really shines. The strategic scenarios are basically the Pacific War, the entire Pacific War, multi-month, long multi-year campaigns with different starting points and different ending points. So it's basically kind of one strategic scenario would have different cutoffs at both the beginning and the end, and there are listed as 5 of those. So again, we can see that there's really 4 different levels to the game. Engagement scenarios, battle scenarios, campaign scenarios where the game really shines, and these are multiple month, like 10-month, 4-month, 20-month kind of campaigns that are playing a substantial portion of the game and take quite a bit of time, and the best kind of experience that you're going to experience from the box. And then the strategic scenarios, which are the full war type campaign games. So with that being in mind, let's take a look quick inside as to what we get. This document in and of itself is 70 pages, and it highlights, I think, another element of the game that's important to consider is there are 10 counter sheets with well over 2,000 counters in this game. And each one of the starting scenarios, so we're looking now battle scenario number 3, Midway, designed for 2 hours, number of players 2, game length is 28 days, and we can see all of the different setup situations here. Now, and then there's special rules for this particular battle. We can look and we can see as we go past these battle scenarios. Here's campaign scenario number 4, Guadalcanal. It says postulated playing time 6 hours, game length is 6 months. This feels a little, I would suspect it's going to take longer than that. But one of the things I think that's important to look at is that we're looking at, you've got 2,000 counters in the game, and we're looking at specific individual ships set up in specific individual places. So I think before you punch out all the counters, you want to have a game plan for how you're going to organize them, because this could take forever just to set up if you don't have your counters organized all that well, especially when you start going off into the strategic games. This is a lot of setup. And we're looking now here at the strategic level setup for, this might be the main strategic scenario number 1, which is the whole Pacific War. I mean, pages of where units have to go in certain places. So if you can't find a unit in that set that you've punched out, it's going to be a very frustrating experience to set it up. So having a game plan for how you set it up and how you store those the counters is going to be very important. Now, as we look back here, even in the beginning ones, just to kind of highlight another element of it, because think the scenario book is actually a great way to kind of get an understanding for the games within the game. These engagement scenarios, again, very short. Talking about invasion of Burma, time 15 minutes, so it's highlighting a different rule set. Setup is very quick and very fast, providing you can find the counters in that set of counters that you've got. So again, we've got a range of experiences here, starting from real quick tactical level types of things to the entire Pacific War. So that gives you an idea kind of the depth and kind of magnitude of what you're getting in the box here. Now, let's take a look at the rule books in and of themselves. And there's 3 of them here. I really like how they've set these up, because what we have here, each rule book is a standalone rule book that covers the different levels in the game. So the first one here, these engagement scenarios rulebook, are just designed for those 8 kind of learning scenarios, starting with Pearl Harbor and going up to the Battle of Java Sea. And it's a full rulebook that highlights all of the kind of the rules that are there. And if it's skipped over a section that's kind of showing up in the other rulebooks, it tells you. It says strategic transport, section 13. This rule is not used in the engagement scenarios. I really like how they've done this, because the easy way to do this would be to kind of pound this all into one rule book and then saying this isn't used in this, having all the rules there and say, but you don't use this section here, you don't use this section for this level of the game. But by breaking it down to a specific rule book for each level of the game, it makes it much more manageable and functional to be able to use the rule books to learn how to play. Had this been blended together into one rule book, I think it would have been, kind of from a learning experience, just a real mess and a real slog. So kudos for doing this right. This is the way I think if you're going to have multiple levels in a game, and this game has basically its 4 different levels, to distinguishing those in that learning experience is really important, especially with a game that has a complexity of 9 like this one does. This makes me feel like this is surmountable. You can do this, especially you're going to start with these engagement scenarios if you've never played before. You're going to read through them. You're going to learn all the rules that you need to do there. Everything's in depth. Everything is here. And then you're going to be able to start learning, playing the engagement scenarios. Now, this still, keep in mind, this is a hefty load. It's 32 pages before you get to the index here. Each one of these rule books also has an index. We got 40 pages of rules to cover these engagement scenarios. And this really kind of gets you started with the system. But again, there's a lot to it. Now, there's a lot of examples that are written out and explained here. It's 2-column, relatively big print with some graphics to help you along. But yeah, this is still, don't come into this without thinking about it, because there's still a heavy load to get into this and to being able to start playing some of these engagements. So 40-page rulebook for the engagement scenarios. Now, the second level is the battle scenarios. This is something like Midway, again, talking about that are going to play over 1 to 3 hours or so, that are very limited in scale. This again has all of the rules. So the rules are duplicated. Basically, if you were to look, any rule that's duplicated in this section, the engagement scenarios, is also written out in full in this section, which is really helpful, because again, the easy way to do it would be to say section 4 is explained in this other rule book, go look at it there. This is the rule book you need to be able to play the battle scenarios. Everything's here. So really kudos to doing this again in the right way. Now, so this one here gets a little bit longer. It's 44 pages with an index, and kind of the same basic type of format, 2 columns, examples and stuff like that to kind of highlight what's going on. So really kind of digging in a full learning experience and a full documentation for learning the battle scenarios. Now, you may be saying, well, wait a second, there's 4 levels to the game, right? There's engagements, battles, then the campaigns, and then the strategic game. The core rule manuals cover both the campaign scenarios and the strategic level of the game. So they've combined those 2 experiences in here. So this is a 68-page rule book with the index starting on page 61. And here are those solitaire guidelines for handling the bidding system here. So there is a mechanic they've built in if you're playing the game on your own to handle the solitaire guidelines. Although I do wonder still about how the game's going to handle that ambiguity and the searches and lack of information that was kind of endemic to all of this theater during World War II. So how does this handle it? In this case, the strategic game rules are all written out in full, and it will tell you when you get to that portion of the rule section that this isn't used. This is used for the strategic level game. It's not used for the scenario, the campaign scenarios. And I'm looking for kind of one in here that might highlight that, but I can't find one offhand. But you'll see it. It'll say, okay, strategic initiative is only used in the strategic campaign, so you don't need this for the campaign scenario. So I feel like this is a manageable way to do that. It wouldn't make sense because of the limited number of strategic rules to duplicate this rulebook and have a fourth rulebook. So I think they've done this in a brilliant way to help people learn how to play the game. I will say this, looking through this does give you an idea of the complexity. We've talked about engineering. I mean, again, you're building a small Japanese air base. This has got everything that you can imagine in here. Here's that strategic initiative rule set that isn't going to be used in the campaign scenarios. I mean, you're building bases. You've got, the influence of light and time of day on search operations, naval repairs, strategic transport, isolation penalty, command links, merchant shipping attrition. There's a section here for the atom bomb command. I mean, this has got everything in submarines, how they're handled, advantage determination, air missions, lighting conditions, and the impact on operations. I mean, it's all here. Naval combat, night operations, torpedoes, paratroopers, ground combat, demolition, pursuit, retreat. And we're only covering maybe a quarter of the little mechanics as we're kind of skimming through this. Everything is here. I think as I look at this, it's obviously an investment of time to learn the system and to play the system, but I think it's going to be something that will reward the learner very, very highly for someone who's going to take the time to learn this. This is for someone who really wants to explore that Pacific War campaign, which gets me back to the idea of Ian Toll's books, because they're 1,500 pages. That's probably a lot less that's going to take you to kind of learn and kind of play and go through the different scenarios here. Now, we do have a fifth a documentation packet. This is the Battle of Coral Sea, extended example of play. So this one comes in where we're going to look at, and I'll show again a screenshot from this too. This shows kind of how the game plays out and the different mechanics in action with lots of graphics and details and explanations as to what's going on. So nice, helpful learning addition to this to the game here as well. And kind of really highlights a lot of the different mechanics in action. Then we have designer notes, what's different, kind of all different aspects. Because this, again, I should have mentioned this, and I think I probably didn't. This is a reworking of the original game, which was published in 1985. Some scenarios have been added, some of the rules have been cleaned up, the map's been changed a little bit. So really kind of a detailed rehashing of what worked and what was kind of some of the struggling mechanics, and so it's not just a reprint, if you would, of the earlier edition. This is a complete reworking of the system, keeping everything that worked really well and adding in some different components and kind of refining some of the different mechanics and things. Now let's take a look. The game comes with 3 maps, 2 mounted maps that you butt together to kind of create the whole Pacific theater, if you would, and then a smaller map that I'll show that when we get there. But these maps are beautiful, gorgeous, and now I'll show a close-up of a couple of these. They're kind of hard to show on a small screen here. I'm going to flip this around because I got these a little bit upside down, and I'll show some close-ups on different sections. But we've got different air bases, islands. It's just a gorgeous representation of the Pacific, and there are 2 of these. And the footprint is actually relatively modest. I mean, we can show the size here. So it's not something that's going to take a lot of table space, although with the player aids, I do wonder how that's all going to work out. But we can see here, full cover, really nice, high-quality maps here, thick. They look very durable, look like they're going to be able to take a lot of gameplay. You can see the Philippines Sea, Australia. The game is somewhat inverted. I'm not quite exactly sure of which way north goes, but north is at the bottom of the map and South Australia is at the top-ish over here. I'm not quite sure exactly where north centers. It feels like almost like that, but I'm kind of speculating there. So beautiful maps, look like they're going to work great to handle a lot of the gameplay, and it's relatively straightforward here in that regard. And now let's add in these things here. We get 2 dice, 10-sided, a red one and a blue one, and so those that's the dice systems that you need. Now let's dig into another fun part here. These are the counter sets. Check it out. There are 10 of them, over 2,000 counters in all. We'll take a look at some of these. They're absolutely beautiful, and each one of them is 2-sided, so we see different information on the back side to help gameplay, and they're used in different ways. We're looking here at this first one, and I'll show some close-ups on air groups. representing the different levels of experience and the different types of aircraft that are in the game. These look like the U.S., maybe kind of carrier-based and land-based perhaps. Then we get into Japanese aircraft here on the other side. So, and they go on and on. There are 3 counter sets here just of the aircraft, and I believe there are a few more that show up later. We can see down in the bottom here we've got some bases. So just a lot of it's a lot of stuff. So obviously you can see, keeping track of how these are sorted and categorized is going to be a key part of it. Before you punch, think about how you want to organize. I think someone could probably make a video. That person isn't me because I don't have any experience with the game system yet. But if you're a veteran of the previous version of Pacific War, I think you could almost make a video explaining how to store and organize the counters. That would be pretty helpful for, I think, a lot of people that are out there. Now we get to ground units. There are 2 counters of these. These range again from the battalion up through the corps level, army group level, actually. A lot of them seem to be the division level or the brigade level, although we do have a number of battalions here. And again, these are all 2-sided with different information on the back. I'm not sure if there's a step system or some kind of a hidden mechanic. I don't quite confess I don't know how the counters work in gameplay, how the 2 sides work yet. But we can see just a vast range of counters here for that one. Counter sheet number 5 gets at the Japanese units. More aircraft here too. They show up. So they're everywhere. Now we get to the ships, and we have 2 counter sheets of the ships. This, of course, we're looking at the U.S. I'll show a close-up on these. Individual ships modeled from destroyers up through carriers and battleships. So really, again, beautiful here. We can see that they are 2-sided. I imagine that's a reduced capacity level for this here, but fantastic. Then we can get to the Japanese ships, again, through the carrier level down into the destroyer level. And I think the destroyer ones, they look like they are perhaps groups of destroyers. I'm not quite sure on that. We have British ships over here on the right-hand side. Again, all 2-sided, and very nice detail. These are matte counters. They're 1/2-inch counters, by the way, and they sit real well on them, really well, nicely printed and things. Here we have, we start to get now into these 3 sheets here, which are the markers for the game. The game uses a vast system of markers to keep track of all the activity. These look like task force markers, I think, up here, task force markers. These must be somewhat related to that, and again, I think these are probably U.S. Group markers. We see task force markers up here, but these might be some type of operational level kind of counters that we've got. Again, not having gone through the game or played the game yet, I'm kind of speculating on some of these. More counters, I think, to mark damage on units. We can see there are quite a bit of here, a whole counter sheet of those. Then this is mostly more, looks like markers to help gameplay. You see broken, weather, strategic intelligence, and things like that. And then a lot of base markers as you're kind of creating bases as you go along through the different campaigns and things. So there we have the 10 counters. There is still more to come, though, although we're getting close now to the end. Here is the smaller map. This is a paper map, and it's a small one. And I can show most of this, although it's not all going to fit on the screen. This is the same scale and size as which is on one of the larger maps. I assume this is used for some of the smaller engagements and battles, so you don't have to spread out the big map. And it's a paper map. So that's very helpful, nice to have included. I think there must be a number of engagements or battles that take place solely on this map, so it reduces your gameplay footprint. And this is a thin paper. Not as elegant, of course, as the mounted ones, but really nice addition to be able to have that in the game so that if you're playing some of these smaller scenarios, you don't have to have the large footprint of the bigger map. Now we are getting closer to the end here. We're at the player aids, and let me put these out. We'll go through these in a big stack here. This is the replacement record sheet. This is used, obviously, to keep track of ground replacements. They're identical on both sides. A nice, thick set here. Of course, you could, I think, copy more and print these out, but it talks about how you work the replacement system in the game. Then we have another set of 8 what are called force display sheets. There are 4 for the Japanese and 4 for the Allied forces, and I'll show a close-up on these. These look like we have kind of screening units and core units based on the different task forces, and then these are forces. I assume maybe these are land or naval, and again, not quite sure how things work. These are all single-sided, so I assume you're keeping these up on your side of the board to keep, kind of hidden from the other player, to kind of keep track of the different forces that are represented on the map. So we can see, force display 1 for the Allies, and then the identical document for the Japanese. Then they go through 2, force display 2, force display 3, force display 3 for the Japanese, and they are there. And then I'm not sure why the Allied force and Japanese force display 4s are different than the previous 3. These just have task force with screens and cores, but there must be some way the rules handle these. The Japanese one has a lesser number of task forces, and then it has a merchant shipping track and a turn track here for this as well. So again, it looks like a rather extensive set. Now these are the simpler, if you would, simpler is kind of an odd term for it, but a simpler representation of the player aids, because now we get into some of the more complex ones, and I'll show a screenshot of this. This is the operation display, and I think about the only thing that I can say right now about this one, in addition to that it doesn't really fit onto the camera here without showing the zoomed out view, is that you can start to get an idea of, by the playing aids and by the charts here that are shown, the complexity and the depth of the systems that are here. These charts have a lot to them, a lot of different aspects, and they represent different mechanics that are going on in the game at incredible detail. So again, the biggest thing I think to take out of these as we look through them is that this is not for the faint of heart. Now, then we have Allied display sheet and an Allied screen. I'll show kind of a distant view of this. Again, getting at a lot of the different components, the different mechanics that are involved with this game. Just kind of reading through some of them. Command point cost, Allied combat point table. There is a time scale up here showing different figures and numbers for the different months and things. I mean, just tons of stuff here that's going to be involved with playing it. A phase track in terms of how the game plays out. So a lot Allied dry dock capacities. I mean, nationality color guide. Everything is here in exquisite detail. Now this is the Pacific War Allied screen, and this gets at that element of, I think you use this to hide your force displays from your opponent, which makes me get back to that idea of, again, I wonder what the solitaire experience is like without having a way to handle the ambiguity of not knowing what your opponent is doing. So again, you're going to be playing both sides in this because there isn't an AI bot. But how does that search and ambiguity of information work in the solitaire experience? It would seem to me, I was chatting with Old Lady Plays about it last night, who's played the original version, and she thinks it would be a vastly different experience playing the solitaire as opposed to 2-player because of exactly that nature. You're going to have so much information that's hidden from your opponent, and to be able to deceive your opponent as to going one way but feinting one way and actually going the other way is a big part of the gameplay here. And how does that get captured in the solitaire experience? But kind of just looking across on this screen here, so I'm assuming this is standing up on the table facing the Allied player. We have merchant shipping, attrition table, ground combat results table, air naval combat results table, and then a search chart going here across from left to right. So again, kind of some of those core mechanics that are going to be used quite a bit. And then we have the Japanese versions of these two. I won't put those up because that's basically a duplication of the Allied side. And with that, we are at the end. There you have it. An unboxing of Pacific War with all its counters, its maps, its player aids, and its rule books. I mean, clearly an amazing creative effort to capture every level and mechanic of the Pacific War. Again, not for the faint of heart, but it strikes me as something that's really going to reward someone. I mean, you're going to get out of this what you put into it, and I think those strategic level, the campaign scenarios really seem to me to be the place where this game's going to shine. And especially, I think, as a 2-player experience, these could be really, really good. I'm looking forward to seeing how, I haven't really explored the vassal module. I think that would be a nice way to get into this because they're going to take I think it's going to take a long time to play some of those campaign scenarios. I feel like those are something that are going to be very rarely accomplished in one sitting. You're going to need multiple days to play them. So extending them out, Vassal module could be very helpful there. And then a nice big table and someone with a good bit of patience that's going to kind of enjoy this learning experience with you seems to be the optimal way to enjoy this. Now I will try to, I'm going to engage in some of the solitaire elements of them, looking at that, and hopeful also too to extend out into a 2-player version. I feel like this game is a rich game that's going to reward its learning with some high quality gaming experiences. There you go. If you've enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new, please consider subscribing. About 40 to 50% of the content on the channel is wargaming content. And I'd be curious, have you played the original version? Are you digging in? Have you gotten this? What are your thoughts as you look at it? Any thoughts on the solitaire experience as in a 2-player experience that also mentions that the strategic games can be played with multiple players? So how might you divide those up in terms of working in teams to play some of the massive 100 to 200 hour campaign games that are here? So very curious to hear people's impressions, and I know it's been showing up and popping up a lot over the internet and on Twitter lately. Very excited to dig in and start the learning process. I'm going to put this one a very slow burn, just really kind of leisurely dig in and explore some of the engagements to kind of start the learning process, with hopefully over the course of this year expanding out to a 2-player game, at least in some of the battle games, and then maybe some of those campaign scenarios look like they would be a lot of fun to play 2-player. I think I might try one solo as well just to see how it works, but very excited to invest some time in this and to bring it forward. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll see you again with more content in the future. Thanks everybody. Have a great day.